After my car accident, my parents and sisters went on a trip and ignored my 7-year-old son while spending $95,000 of my savings, so I secured my accounts and cut them off. 2 hours later, they called me in shock. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the deafening silence. Hospitals were supposed to be noisy. Monitors beeping, nurses talking, machines whirring. But all I heard was my own ragged breathing. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. My body ached, as if it had been through a war. The last thing I remembered was the truck's headlights blinding me, the sickening crunch of metal, and then nothing. Panic shot through me like an electric shock. "Leo." My voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. "Where's my son?" A nurse looked up from her station, her expression soft but hesitant. "Your family took him home." Relief flooded me. Thank God. My 7-year-old baby was safe. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. It was dead. "Can you charge this for me?" I asked. She nodded, plugging it in. "Your family visited yesterday," she said after a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Yesterday? Then, why weren't they here now?" A sick feeling curled in my stomach. I waited, heart pounding, until my phone had enough charge to turn on. The second it lit up, dozens of messages flooded in, but not from my parents or sisters. Friends, colleagues, people checking in on me. But my own family? Nothing. And then I saw it. My bank notifications, $95,000, gone. The room spun. No, this wasn't happening. I had been saving that money for years. For Leo. For emergencies. For security. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I scrolled frantically, hoping I was imagining it, but the transactions were there, one after the other. Withdrawals, flights booked, luxury hotels, they stole from me. Just then, my phone dinged. A message from my cousin. "I can't believe your parents and sisters left for their trip today, after everything you just went through." "I'm so sorry." "Trip?" My fingers shook as I opened social media. And there it was, a photo of my sisters beaming in first class. My mother holding up a champagne glass, shopping bags from luxury brands. The caption, "Nothing like a well-deserved getaway. Time to enjoy life to the fullest." The world blurred with rage. They took my money, left my son, and went on vacation. I barely managed to dial the number before I hit call. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then my mother answered. Her voice was annoyed. "What?" I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Where is my son?" A pause. Then she scoffed. She actually scoffed. "Oh, calm down. He's fine. He's home." "Alone?" I nearly dropped the phone. "You left him home alone?" I choked. Another scoff. "He's 7. He can handle himself." The rage that filled me in that moment was something I had never felt before. They had abandoned my child with my money, and they were about to learn exactly what that meant. I hung up, without another word. Then I called my neighbor, Mrs. Hayes. She answered on the first ring. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Mrs. Hayes, my son. Is he?" "He's with me," she said softly. "Your family left him alone." He knocked on my door, terrified. Tears burned my eyes. That was it. That was the last straw. I dialed my bank. "Freeze all my accounts," I ordered. "Now." Then, I called my lawyer. They thought they could steal from me and get away with it? They had no idea who they were dealing with. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. "What did you do?" she demanded. I smiled coldly. "Enjoying your trip?" Silence. Then my sister's voice cut in. Hysterical. "We tried using the cards, but they're all locked. We're stuck." "What did you do?" I leaned back, savoring the moment. "I secured what's mine." They spluttered, furious, panicking. "You're leaving us stranded?" I laughed. A low, dark laugh. "You stranded yourselves." And then, for the first time in my life, I hung up on them. The next day, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. I played it later, just to hear the desperation. It was my mother, her voice trembling. "I didn't think it would turn out like this," she said, sounding genuinely afraid. "We thought you'd forgive us." "You always do." She paused. "Please. We need you." I stared at the phone for a long time. And then, for the first time ever, I deleted the message. The weight of their choices, not mine, settled like a storm cloud over them. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt before when it came to my family. Absolute freedom. No guilt. No obligation. No second guessing. Just freedom. I sat on my bed, my body still sore from the accident, my mind still processing everything. My phone lay beside me, still vibrating every few minutes with their desperate calls. I ignored every single one. Instead, I turned my attention to Leo. He sat beside me, holding his stuffed dinosaur, his comfort toy. His little fingers clutched it so tightly, his knuckles were pale. He had been holding in his feelings this whole time, trying to be brave. But, I knew my baby. I knew the moment I pulled him into my arms, it would all come pouring out. And, I was right. His little body shook against mine. His sobs muffled against my hospital gown. "They left me, Mommy," he whispered through hiccups. I woke up, and they weren't there. The house was so quiet. My heart clenched, a fresh wave of rage and heartbreak hitting me. I swallowed hard, stroking his hair. "I know, baby," I whispered back. "And I am so sorry." He pulled back, tears still shimmering in his big brown eyes. Did I do something wrong? That question nearly shattered me. I cupped his little face, forcing him to look into my eyes. "No, baby. Never. You did nothing wrong." "They did." His lip trembled. "Then why did they leave?" How could I explain to a 7-year-old that the people who were supposed to love us had never really cared at all? That to them, he and I had been nothing more than resources to be used and discarded? I couldn't. So, I told him what I could. "Because they don't know how to love, right?" I said softly. "But that's not our fault." He sniffled. "Are they coming back?" I took a deep breath, making a promise right then and there. "No, baby, they're not." His body sagged with relief. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. The next few days were a blur of damage control. I had to resecure all my finances, change passwords, call my bank and credit card companies, make sure they couldn't touch a single cent ever again. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was playing offense. My lawyer called me back after reviewing my case. "You have every legal right to take action against them," she said. "With your medical condition at the time of the withdrawals, we can push for fraud charges." Fraud. The word felt so right. For years, they had defrauded me in every way possible, emotionally, financially, mentally. This time, they were going to face real consequences. The first real hit came when I reversed the fraud charges. Every single dollar they had spent, the banks took it back. The hotels demanded payment. The airlines flagged them. I imagined their faces, their pure shock as their luxury dream trip turned into a nightmare. The texts started flooding in. From my mother, "How could you do this to us? We're stranded." From my sister, "They took our luggage. We have nothing." From my father, "You better fix this now." I laughed. Fix this? For them? After what they did to me, the real fun began when word started getting out. Because for years, my family had built a reputation as perfect, loving, generous people. They went to church every Sunday. They boasted about being charitable. But the moment the truth came out, the cracks started showing. Mrs. Hayes, my sweet elderly neighbor who had saved Leo that night, was the first to spread the truth. She told everyone what had happened. How they had stolen from their own daughter. How they had abandoned their own grandson. And suddenly, people weren't so willing to help them anymore. 2 weeks later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and there they were. My mother, my father, my 2 sisters. They looked haggard. My father's usual proud, confident stance was gone. My mother's makeup was smudged. My sisters, who usually carried themselves with such arrogance, looked defeated. I let them wait. Then finally I opened the door. My mother tried to push past me. "We need to talk." I didn't budge. She wasn't welcome here anymore. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. Voice calm, controlled. She scoffed, waving a desperate hand. "We had a hard time, okay? We weren't thinking straight. You stole from me." My voice was sharp, unforgiving. "You abandoned my son." My father bristled. "You're still our daughter." I smiled, but there was nothing kind about it. "No. I was just your bank." I didn't let them apologize because it wasn't real. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. I pulled out a single envelope and handed it to them. "What's this?" my mother asked warily. "A legal notice," I said simply. I had filed a permanent restraining order. They would never use, manipulate, or steal from me again. My mother's face crumpled. My father's jaw tightened. My sisters, who had always seen me as nothing but a source of money, looked horrified. "No," my mother whispered. You can't do this." I met her gaze. "I just did." Then, I shut the door in their faces. The silence in my house was deafening. But, for the first time in my life, it wasn't the kind of silence that suffocated me. It wasn't the silence of waiting for my mother's next demand, my father's next cold glare, or my sister's endless entitlement. It was peaceful. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the restraining order in my hands, the final nail in the coffin of everything they had taken from me. The ink had dried, and with it, so had my last ounce of care for them. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the small yard where Leo played with Mrs. Hayes' dog. His laughter rang out, free, unburdened. That was what mattered now. I glanced at my phone. They hadn't tried to call since I served them. That should have felt like a victory. But deep down, there was still that nagging voice, the one that had been conditioned in me for years. Did I go too far? Was cutting them off really the right thing? Maybe they didn't mean it. But then I thought about Leo, about how he had knocked on Mrs. Hayes' door in the middle of the night, shaking, crying, abandoned. And just like that, the doubt evaporated. They had meant every single cruel thing they did. And I had meant every single action I took to stop them. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no emotional blackmail. They had finally realized they had lost control over me. But just because they weren't in my life anymore didn't mean their ghosts weren't still haunting me. I saw them in every hesitation. Every time I went grocery shopping, I caught myself picking up extra items, things my sisters used to demand I buy for them. I had to remind myself that I wasn't responsible for them anymore. Every time Leo hesitated before asking for something, a toy, a snack, even just my time, I saw the damage they had done. The way he had learned to tiptoe around adults, afraid of being a burden. It took weeks of reassuring him, of holding him when he needed comfort, instead of leaving him to cry alone like they had. Of telling him every single day, "You are not a burden. You are my son, and I love you." Eventually he started to believe me. Eventually, I started to believe myself. It was strange, building a life that didn't revolve around them. For years, my life had been reactive. I had lived in constant defense mode, scrambling to fix their messes, to fulfill their needs, to pour from an empty cup. Now, I was finally living for myself. I picked up hobbies I had long forgotten. I started reading again real books, not just bank statements and financial reports to make sure I wasn't being robbed blind. I started cooking for joy, not just out of necessity. And the best part? Leo flourished. His laughter was louder. His steps were lighter. He no longer asked me, in that small hesitant voice, if I was going to leave him like they did. He knew I never would. Just when I thought they had finally accepted defeat, it happened. A knock at my door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mrs. Hayes never knocked. She always just called before coming over. And Leo was already inside with me. Slowly, I approached the door, peering through the peephole, and there she was. My mother, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, looking desperate. I didn't open the door. Instead, I waited. She knocked again, softer this time. Then, after a long pause, she spoke through the door. "I know you're in there." I said nothing. I just want to talk." I should have ignored her. I should have walked away. But against my better judgment, I said, "Talk then." I didn't open the door. I wasn't going to make that mistake. My mother sighed, as if she was the one carrying the weight of the world. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said finally. "You destroyed us, you know. We lost everything because of you." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. "Because of me?" she continued, her voice growing sharper. "You left us stranded in another country. You took everything from us." I took a slow, deep breath, and then I said, calmly, evenly, "No. You took everything from me, and now, you're just facing the consequences of your own actions." Silence. Then, finally, she dropped the act. "You were supposed to forgive us," she snapped. "Ah, there it was. That's what you always do," she continued, her voice rising. "You always forgive us. You always come back. But this time, I cut her off. This time, I finally learned my lesson." And then, without another word, I walked away from the door. Let her talk to the wood. Saying no was the most powerful thing I had ever done. No to manipulation. No to guilt. No to allowing them back into my life. My mother stayed outside for almost an hour. Eventually, she left. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. Healing wasn't instant. It took time. There were still moments where I found myself reaching for my phone, instinctively expecting a call from them, expecting another crisis I had to fix. But the calls never came. And, for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. Months passed. Leo started school again, and for the first time, he didn't look over his shoulder, waiting for someone to leave him. I got a new job, one that actually made me happy. I built a support system, real friends who actually cared about me, and I thrived without them. One day, long after it all happened, Leo curled up beside me on the couch. He looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. "Peace, Mommy?" he asked softly. "Yeah, baby, I'm happy now." Tears burned in my eyes. I kissed his forehead, my heart swelling. "Me too, baby," I whispered. "Me too." And for the first time in my life, I really, truly meant it. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a realization hit me, a simple yet powerful truth. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the good daughter, trying to be the fixer, the problem solver, the one who held everything together. And where had it gotten me? Abandoned. Used. Betrayed. But now Now, I was free. Leo was safe. He was loved. He was thriving. I had built a life that was mine. I had people who actually cared about me, Miss Hayes, my co-workers, even the few old friends who had always told me I deserved better. For the first time, I believed them. I believed in me. A few weeks later, my phone lit up with a notification. An email from my father. The subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. I didn't need to because I already knew what it said. Some sob story? Some attempt to manipulate me? Some last-ditch effort to drag me back into their control? But that bridge was burned to ashes. So I did the only thing left to do. I deleted the email. And I never looked back. I always wondered if they would try one last time, show up at my door, make some grand, dramatic plea. But they didn't. And honestly, I think they knew. They knew that I was no longer the person they could control. They knew I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They knew that this time, they had pushed too far. And when a narcissist realizes they've lost control, they disappear. Just like that, they were gone. And I felt nothing but relief. One evening, as Leo and I sat on the porch, Mrs. Hayes brought over a fresh batch of cookies. "Thought you two could use some extra sweetness," she said with a wink. Leo grinned, grabbing a cookie with both hands. And in that moment I realized something. Family isn't about blood. It's about love. It's about the people who stay. The people who choose you, not for what you can give them, but simply for who you are. And as I laughed with my son and our newfound family, I knew one thing for certain. We were finally, truly home.